All right, good morning, everybody. We are a little behind, actually. So I think today's blot is Daf Samach Zayin. We actually are a few lines towards the top of Samach Vav Amud Beis. We're by Eisvei Abaya Larava. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the top of Samach Vav Amud Beis. And just a really quick intro before we really dive in is what we saw at the end of yesterday's Daf was a machlokas Rabba and Rav Yosef about the status of Yush. So we know there are certain times in halacha, specifically with the Motzei Aveda, that when the Baal Aveda is miyayish, if he gives up hope, that it can affect a kinyan on the part of the Motzei Aveda. The question is, when it comes to a Ganav or a Goslin, does something similar apply? Does the fact that the victim is miyayish, does that affect a certain kinyan for the Ganav or the Goslin, or does it not? And again, this has nothing to do with mitzvos and averos. Clearly, there was a chait, and clearly he's a bad guy, and clearly he needs to do kapara. But the question is more fundamentally, what is his responsibility in terms of how does he pay this back? Does he pay back the item? Or maybe he was koned to the item, now he pays back cash. Maybe does he have to pay if he does a tficha metir, does he have to pay the nas? These are all these types of questions that come up, whether he's koned of the item or he's not koned of the item. So again, a few lines from the top about
the fact that the item is an animal and it damages something, who owns it to the
so I think that's always going to be the Ganav regardless. Yeah. So he's chayav for own sin and things like that. Yeah. All right. So Eisvei Abaya LeRabba. So again, Rabba held that Yush is Kona, and Rav Yosef says that Yush is not Kona. And what's fascinating here is Abaya, I think we speak this out every now and again, Abaya was very, very close to both Rabba and Rav Yosef. So he's going to kind of ask kashas on both of them, which is always fascinating. So Eisvei Abaya LeRabba. Karban no, this is right in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra. The pasuk talking about a carbon ola says that it has to be your carbon, velo hagazel. So that's the brisa. Carbon no, it has to be your carbon, velo hagazel. It can't be stolen. So what is this case of me bringing a stolen carbon, right? So like Ilay Malachne Yush, let's say the rightful owner wasn't Miyayish, Lamali Kra, Shita. Meaning imagine the case where Randy's got an animal and I steal Randy's animal and I try to bring it as a carbon. Well, right, I can't be Makdish. I can't be Makdish Randy's animal. It's not mine. Therefore, if I even try to bring Randy's animal, it's Hulin La'azar. So I don't need a pasuk to tell me that I can't bring Randy's animal and try to bring a carbon, right? So Elalav La'achar Yush. What must be going on is I stole it. Randy now is miyayish because how is he ever going to find his animal? And that's the chiddush of this brisa, the shlamina yush lo kani. That even though I stole it, and even though Randy was miyayish, it's not my animal. I still can't bring it as a carbon. Isn't this the mafurish raya from this brisa against Rabba and supporting Rav Yosef? So Amarle Rabba says, "Well, taimech hadetanya mishkavo v'lo agazel." This is a unique halacha in the context of a zav. So a zav is mitame mishkav v'moshav, and he's bless you. Azav is matame mishkav v'moshav, but it has to be his. That means if he sits on a couch, right, the couch can become an avatoma. But it has to be mishkav vo. It has to be his couch below hagazal. So again, hey chidami, ilaim with the gazal amra. What is this case? Did he steal like threads or whatever it goes to making a couch? But avde mishkav, and then he takes the stuff that he stole and he creates a couch. Mikalamandamar shino imaisa lo kani. Then of course he'd be going to that. Everyone agrees shino imaisa is going to work. So what is this case of a guzzle not being matami mishkav moshav? The guzzle mishkav the chabre. You stole Randy's couch. If a zav steals Randy's couch, then Randy's couch isn't matami mishkav moshav. Hachanami to guzzle carbon the chabre. So what's this case of the carbano talking about? Where Randy had an animal that Randy was makdish as an ola. Now I come along and I steal Randy's ola and I bring it as an ola. There's no havamina that, of course, it's not going to work for me, but the havamina would be that maybe Randy would at least get his carbon because I'm bringing Randy's carbon. Kamash Malan, that no, you can't steal someone else's carbon and then bring it as a carbon. It's not going to work. But the bottom line is, this is not a raya either way to the discussion of Yush being Kona or Yush not being Kona. So again, that was a Abai asking the kasha on Rabba, and I was going to go the other way. So Eisvei, yeah, all of these things. Well, just because it's mishkav aver doesn't necessarily mean that carbon isn't halal. Again, I wouldn't get a mitzvah, but maybe Randy.
Oh,
yeah. Okay, so we are at the two dots. Eisvei on Samach Vav Amud Beis we'll go with 12 or 13 lines from the top. So Eisvei Abaya Rav Yosef. So Abaya asked Rav Yosef a kasha. A bit of a technical thing. This is in the 26th parak of Maseches Kelim. So what's going on over here? We know it's Maseches Kelim, so we know we're dealing with obscure sugyas of Tumah V'Tara. But if you've got, the bottom line is, if I create something, right, when is it Mekabel Tumah? When can it be Mekabel Tumah? When I'm done working it. But if there's still more work to be done, it can't be Mekabel Tumah until I'm done with this item. So the Mishnah says as follows: Oros shel Baal Habayis. Let's say you have a Baal Habayis and I'm working my leathers because I'm trying to do something. So machshava mitamasan. When I am ready to basically say I am now done with it, I have a machshava that says that I'm done. That's enough to be Mekabel Tumah. But Vishal Abdan, if you're a professional tanner, ein machshava mitamasan. So the professional tanner, even if he says, all right, I think this item, whatever I'm tanning it for, is good, that's not sufficient. Why? Because at any point, someone can come into my store and say, I'd really like to buy that, but I would love if you made it shoes. And then he'll take it and he'll work it a little bit more. So the point is, if I'm a Baal Habayis, and I don't do this professionally, so I know how far I want to take this item, and whenever I'm done, I'm done. If I'm a professional tanner, even if I think I'm done, we say I'm not quite done because more can happen. Fine. But the important part is, B'shal Ganiv, Machshava Mitamasan. If I'm a Ganiv, meaning I stole someone else's Oros, and now I'm working the Oros, again, my machshava is enough to be Mekabel Tumah. What's the why? Because the assumption is that the owner was miyayish when I'm a ganav. He doesn't know who I am. I stole it in the middle of the night. He doesn't know how he's going to get it back. So the assumption is he was miyayish, and that's why the ganav is kind of like the Baal Habayis. But b'shal gadlin ein machshava mitamasan. If you're a gadlin, then machshava alone isn't going to work. Why? Because the guy knows who I am. The guy will take me to court. So he'll get his Oros back. So the fact that I'm working someone else's Oros doesn't work. Rav Shimon Omer Chilaf Hadvarim. Rav Shimon argues with the Tanna Kama on a psychological matter, and he says, I actually hold this just the opposite. Shal Gazlan Machshava Mitamasan. A Gazlan, the owner was miyayish. Why? Because I'm a big bad Gazlan. I came up to you right in the middle of the day and I took your thing. Clearly, I'm a big scary guy. But Shal Ganiv, a Machshava Mitamasan. But if it's only a Ganiv, the Baal Habayis is not miyayish. Why is he not miyayish? Because I guess the assumption is exactly he'll find him. But the point is, and here's the key: the Mishnah says, the Mishnah is very clear that this entire discussion of Rav Shimon and the Tanna Kama, it all has to do with Yish. But the clear implication is Shma Mina Yish Koneh. That again, there's all this psychology about when is a person miyayish, when is he not miyayish. But clearly, if a person is miyayish, that affects a kinyan for the Ganav or the Gazlan. So this is a Mafurish Akasha on Rav Yosef. So Amar Le, Rav Yosef's going to answer, this wasn't Yish alone. The guy, whoever it was, also trimmed the leather, and therefore he did some sort of Shinui Maisa. Everyone agrees that Shinui Maisa is good. So the question, of course, is, if he did a Maisa, so why is the Mishnah talking about Yish? Just say Maisa. So clearly this Maisa isn't enough to affect the kinyan on its own. It's got to be this Maisa along with Yish. So Rav Yosef is going to say, listen, I don't think Yish alone works, but Yish along with this Maisa works. And clearly the Maisa wasn't enough to do it on its own. The Maisa needed the Yish. But the point is, with the two of them, that's how this affects this kinyan. But the bottom line is, it's not a kasha on Rav Yosef, because Rav Yosef will say this wasn't Yish alone. This was Yish along with the Shinui Maisa. But Maskefla Rabba Bar Chanan, or Rabba says, I don't like that answer because V'halo Itzba Shanukan. We are dealing with a specific leather item known as an itzba, which I believe is a tray. The itzba ain't tzricha kitua. And when this itzba, even if you didn't trim it, it still would be a fashion kli. Now, first of all, two things, right? So Rashi explains, again, we don't know anything about these itzbas. Obviously, we're taking everyone's word for granted here. But this is the sort of tray where the whole purpose of trimming it was just to make it more beautiful. But in terms of a usable kli, it was a kli even without the kitsua. You know what? Again, this is different times. But bottom line, how do we even know that we're dealing with this itzba, right? The Mishnah doesn't say anything about an itzba. So if you look in Maseches Kelim, the Mishnah that we just brought was, I believe, Mishnah Ches of the 26th parak of Kelim. And this Mishnah that we're about to bring is the previous Mishnah that was dealing with an itzba. So Ditnan, any time that you basically finished your malacha, again, your thought alone can be machshir this thing to be Mekabel Tumah. Yesh chishon malacha. If you're not done working it, ein machshava metamasa. But chutz min itzba, with the exception of an itzba, that even if you're not totally done working it, because you still have to trim this thing, it's still going to be considered done because it's already a usable tray. So the point is, the kash on Rav Yosef is, why are you telling me that you needed to do this Maisa? You didn't need to do this Maisa, and the halacha would have still applied. So Ella Amar Rava. So Rava says like this, a fascinating line. Hi Milsa Kashi Be Rabba Rav Yosef Esrim Etartin Shnin. This is a kasha that Rabba asked Rav Yosef for 22 years. Below Ifrika, and Rav Yosef never had an answer. Ad Yasser Rav Yosef Beresha, until Rav Yosef himself became Rosh Hashiva. So Rav Yosef succeeded Rabba in the yeshiva. Rabba was a Rosh Hashiva, and then Rabba passed away, and Rav Yosef succeeded him. And on that day, he was able, he had Siyata Shmaya, and he was able to answer all sorts of questions. This was one of the questions, and the answer that he gave was Shinui Hashem, Yeshinui Ma'isa Dami. That it's not the Yush alone, and it's not even the Shinui Ma'isa, but it's the Shinui Hashem. Shinui Ma'isa, my time out. Why does Shinui Ma'isa affect the Kinyan? Because Hasam Ekara Eitzim and Hashta Kalim. You stole wood as the example, and you fashioned Kalim out of them. Shinui Hashem Nami Meikara Karula Mashcha. This thing was originally called a hide, the Hashta Abarzin, and now it's called an Abarzin, which apparently is the same word as Itzba, some sort of tray. But the point is, Rav Yosef's answering, he said it's not the Yush alone, and it's not even the Shinui Ma'isa, but it's the Shinui Hashem. This thing went from being worth. This thing went from being called a hide to being called an Itzba or an Abarzin or whatever the word is. Therefore, that is what affects the Kinyan, not the Yush alone, but the Yush along with the Shinui Hashem. But the point is, the Shinui Hashem affects Kinyan. But the Gemara says, is that true? Bahari Marish, but what about a beam in a house? The Iko Shinui Hashem, Meikara Kshura, it used to be called a beam. Bahashta Klala, once you put it into a ceiling, now it's known as a roof or a ceiling. Utznan, and we have a Mishnah, and it says Ala Marish, Hagazol, if you have a stolen beam, Shabanu Babira that you built into a house, Shanotal Dama. If you're the Ganav, you don't have to take apart your house, you can just pay the victim cash. And the reason why we'd say this is, again, a similar idea to what we said yesterday. There's this takanas hashavim, which is if we made someone take down his entire house, he would never do it. He would never fess up to it. If we allow him to pay cash, then maybe he'll want to get his kapara and he'll pay the cash. But what's the point? Time of takanas hashavim. The only reason why this works that you can pay cash is a takanas chachamim. Halavachi hadr be'ena. But if not for that, you'd have to pay back the beam. But what are you talking about? You just said that you're kona with a shinoi Hashem, and this thing was called a beam. Now it's called a roof. Why do I need a takanas chazal? Why can't I just pay cash because there was a Shinui Hashem? So Amar Rav Yosef will say that that beam is a different story because Marish Shmo Alav. Even though the beam is in the ceiling, it's still called a beam. There isn't a proper Shinui Hashem when it comes to a Marish. Tanya, this is a brisa. We learn from Sukkim all the way in Yechezkel, referring to the third base on Migdash. Salos Habayis, the Salos of this third base on Migdash, Elu Hamid. Hamalatatin, these are, I believe, casings, but someone can correct me if it's not what they are. The ha'ovim and these things in the roof, elu hamarishos, these are the beams in the roof. But the point is, when referring to the third base of Mikdash and referring to beams that are in the roof, it still refers to them as marishes, as marishim. And therefore, we see that even when beams are in the roof, there isn't a proper shinui Hashem. They were called marish before they were in the roof, and even when they're in the roof, they're still called marish. Rav Zera Amar, he says a different teretz. He says, Shinui hachozer libriyaso, but Shinui Hashem lo havi shinui. Rav Zera says like this, you're right, that the beam was a beam, and now it's a roof. But beams are a different story, because when you take the beam out of the roof, if you were to take it out of the roof, it would go back to being called a beam again. So it's not a proper Shinui Hashem. Shinui Hashem is once you've done something to the thing, you change the name entirely. But when it comes to a beam, it's a beam while it's a wooden 2x4, then you put it in the roof, now it's called a roof, but you take it out of the roof, it's back to being called the beam, and therefore you can't ask a kasha from the beam. But the Gemara says, bless you, but the Gemara says, is the implication there that a Shinui Hashem that stays forever, that is a proper Shinui? But Shinui Hashem, she'eno chozul abraso mi hava Shinui, we're going to have a kasha from another obscure halacha in the world of mikvos. So again, I don't know much about mikvos, but I think what we all know about mikvos, right, is if you got your 40 saw of good water, then you can have as much mayim shuvim and it doesn't have an impact. But if you don't have your 40 sav, a good mikvah, then enough mayim she'uvim, right? Shlosha logim mayim she'uvim, that can possible an entire mikvah, right? That's all we really need to know for this next Gemara. Baharet sinor. So you've got a pipe, right? The meikara ketitzta. Before you fashion into a pipe, it was a block of wood. The hashka sinora. Then when you fashion the pipe, when you carve it out, now it's a pipe, right? Vitanya. But yet we have a brisa. And it says that sinor shachakako ulubasov kavo. If you have a block of wood and you make it into a pipe and then you put it into the ground, postalas the mikvah. That's a pipe where if you have water that now comes into the mikvah via this pipe, and you don't have enough 40 sav, whatever it is, that can possible a mikvah. But kavu ulubasov chakaku. But if I put my block of wood into the ground and then I fashion the pipe, ain't no postalas a mikvah. For whatever reason, that the wood is kind of becomes like the ground. And that, if water now flows through the same pipe, it's not going to possible the mikvah. Now, if you're going to tell me that Shinoi Hashem is a thing, then the bottom line is this thing is a pipe, and if it's a pipe, then it should possible the mikvah via Mayim She'uvim. So I don't understand. Shouldn't this thing be a Shinoi Hashem? The Gemara answers, Shiny She'iva Dimidrabanani. Basically, you're right, but this whole idea of Mayim She'uvim, it's on some level, it's a midrabanan, whatever it is, and therefore we're just a little bit more makel when it comes to this issue. But the Gemara says, Yihachi, if you're telling me that we're makel because of this, afilu tzarei what about the first case? Why aren't we makel in that case too? If I take a pipe and you put it in the ground, why aren't we makel there too? So the Gemara says a pretty obvious answer. I mean, Hasam ika Torah's kliya love b'tolosh, hacha ain Torah's kliya love b'tolosh. Bottom line is, you're right. We are generally pretty makel, but we even have our limits. So if you're going to put wood into the ground and then fashion the kli when it's in the ground, over there will be makel. But if you're going to take an actual pipe and put it into the ground, that already is too much. And even though this is only midrabanan, we're still not going to be makel like that. But one more question, and then we're going to shift gears a little bit. Again, the question is Yush Kona or is Yush not Kona? Meiseve Haganev v'Hagazlan v'Anas. If you have a Ganev or a Gazlan or an Anas, Rashi says, is like the Chamtin. So the Chamtin is the person who, doesn't steal. He takes your thing and throws you cash. So, he forces you to sell your item. All of those people, Hekdeshan Hekdish, Utrumasan Truma, Umaisrosan Meiser. They're makdish this item. It's a good Hekdish if they declare Truma, it's a good Truma. If they do Meiser, it's a good Meiser. What do you mean? What the kasha is, how is this guy ever kona his item? Right? He's a Ganav. Right, must be that the victim was miyayish, and that's why the ganav is able, exactly, right? But what does that prove? That Yush is kona. It's a kasha on Rav Yosef, and it's a raya to Rabbah. But Amri hasam ika shinui Hashem. They say no. Over there, it's a shinui Hashem. De meikara tivla, because originally this was tevel, the hashta truma. Hektish meikara chulin, the hashta hektish. So it's a shinui Hashem, and therefore it's not a good. It's not a good question. The obvious question on this entire Gemara is, what are you talking about? It's unbelievably circular. It's only hektish because the person was able to be kona the item to make it hektish. So what do you mean there's a shinui Hashem? Meaning, if the guy was able to be kona, he can make it hektish. How can you say, well, it's hektish because it was a shinui Hashem, and that's what affected the kingdom? The whole thing is very circular, right? So amazingly, I don't think the Rishonim on the page talk about this. There's no Rashis, and I don't think Tosfos talked about this. But what you see, the ArtScroll quotes it, is in the sugyas of Gittin, where this very similar idea comes up, where you have let's say you want to put a woman's get in her chutzner, right? The question is, how does she have a chutzner? She's married to a husband, and does this belong to the husband? So the answer is, well, Gittin, whatever, it all comes at the same time. And you have the same kind of question, I think, in that sugya where they really analyze this, and they must bring this up. So apparently there's a Rashba over there in Gittin, which really gets into the crux of this. But again, it's a bit of a hard answer, but that seems to be at least how the notes in ArtScroll deal with this. Okay, Amr of Chizda, Amr of Yonasan. So this is going to sound a lot like yesterday. We're kind of going backwards a little bit. Minayin the Shinui Shehu Kona. So Rabbah opened the sugya yesterday and he said, I know for sure that Shinui Maisa is Kona. I have rayas from Psukim, I have rayas from Mishnayos. Now Rav Chizda and Rav Yonasan say the same thing. How do I know that Shinui is Kona? Shenamar, Yeheshev es Gazela, Asher Gazal. Right? The pasuk says you have to return the Gazela, Asher Gazal. Maltam Asher Gazal. Why do I need the extra words Asher Gazal? You just told me it was Gazela. Right, so im ke'ein shagazal yachzer. So what we darshan is, if the item is exactly the same, you can just give it back. But be'im la, but if you made a shinoi to it, damim ba'alma ba'yishumi, then you have to pay cash. But the Gemara says that's what you learn from Asher Gazal. Hi, Asher Gazal. Mimbaya limute gezel aviv. We have another drasha that we're going to see later in the Masechta. Yesterday we talked about what happens when a shomer, like a shomer chinam, for example, steals something and then he swears that he didn't steal it, and then he fesses up, so he's got to pay the chomesh, he's got to bring a carbon. What happens if a person does that and he acknowledges and he agrees and he's chayav a chomesh, but then he dies? And now his kids are yoresh all of his money. Are they chayav to pay the chomesh? So the halacha is that they're chayav to pay the karen back to the victim, but they don't have to pay the chomesh. And we learned that out from these words, Asher Gazal. It's after the person that stole it, but the person's heirs are not chayav to pay the chomesh. So the Gemara is asking, Hi Asher Gazal, mi ba'ile mutei gezel aviv, she'eno mosef chomesh al gezel aviv. We need those words to teach me this halacha that you don't pay the chomesh on stuff that your father stole. But the Gemara says, Im kain nichtav rachmana v'heshav es gezelo. You didn't need to say Asher Gazal. You just needed to say v'heshav es gezelo. You know, his gezel. Asher Gazal lamali lemichtav shma mina tarti. So that's how I can learn both ideas, both the idea that Shinoi Maisa is Kona, and this idea that I'm not chayav to pay a chomesh for my father's, to repay my father's stolen stuff. Vika the Amri, some had a different version of this. Gemara Amar Chizam Rav Yonasan Minan L'Shinoi She'eno Kona. How do I know that a Shinoi Maisa is not Kona? She'namar V'heshav es Gzela Mikol Makom, because the pasuk says V'heshav es Gzela Mikol Makom. I can always return the Gzela even if I made a change to it. The Gemara asks, L'Ksiv Asher Gazal. What do you mean? Well, it says Asher Gazal. So the Gemara answers that Huma Baya later teach me this other finish. Al Gazelo Shelo Mosef Chomesh Ve'ei Mosef Chomesh Al Gazal Aviv. And Amar Ula Minayin Liyush She'eno Kona. So again, we're kind of working backwards. This was Rav Yosef in yesterday's stuff, right? Amar Ula. So he says, how do I know that Yush is not Kona? Shenemar. This is the pasuk in Malachi, where I guess the Jews are getting musar for bringing different types of karbanos. So it's v'havesem gazol esapiseach v'sachola. You're bringing me these karbanos that are stolen, that have a mum, that are sick. So gazol dumia to piseach. The pasuk sounds like they're comparing a stolen animal to an animal that has a mum. Ma piseach just like an animal with a mum. There's never any sort of takana. Turn the page. Gazol the last takanta. So too, a stolen animal doesn't have a takana. Lo shna lefnei yish, v'lo shna liachar yish. So it sounds like this animal cannot be brought as a karban, not before yish and not after yish. Shma mina that yish is not kona. Rava Amar. Rava said it differently when he said mehacha karban no below ha gazol. The pasuk right in the beginning of Sefer Vayikra says that it's got to be your karban and not a stolen carbon. Amos, what is this pasuk talking about? If it was before Yish, Pshita Lamali Crow. Why do I need a pasuk to know that I can't take Randy's animal and be makdish? Of course I can't take Randy's animal. It's Kula Nazara, right? What gave me the right to be makdish Randy's animal? Elalav, La'achar Yish, the Chiddush must be, it was Achar Yish, Shma Mina, Yish Lo Kona, Shma Mina. So the obvious question the Gemara is about to ask is, if you just remember the beginning of the daf, this was a kasha, and Rava gave an answer to this question, right? Rava said, no, it's when you stole Randy's animal that Randy was Makadish or Makdish. So the Gemara says, V'ha Rava hu da Amar, the Gezel Karban the Chavre. I mean, Rava was the one who gave that answer. How is Rava asking this question right now? So the Gemara says, Yibayas name Hadar. You can either answer that Rava was Hadar, and he now doesn't think what he thought an hour ago or 20 minutes ago. One of them was actually Rav Papa. It wasn't actually Rava. And the Bach, very fascinating. The Bach says over here that Rav Papa succeeded Rava in that yeshiva, I guess Pampadisa or wherever they were. So it's possible that like people may have just gotten confused over the years, like they thought they heard a shir from Rava, Rav Papa, something like that. Okay, so we'll just get to the two dots at the bottom of the page. This next tomorrow is pretty easy. Look at this, plenty of time. 7:35, fantastic. So going back to the first Mishnah in the Perek, going back to Daf Samach Beis, we said Meruba Midas Tashlumi Kefal Midas Tashlumi Arba B'Chamisha, because Tashlumi Kefal applies to things that are alive, to things that are not alive. Midas Tashlumi Arba B'Chamisha only applies to Shar and Seh. How do I know Shar and Seh? The pasuk says Yignovish Shar O Seh Tvachom Machara. Right, so now the Gemara is going to say, basically, just because the pasuk says Shar Oseh, why do I think that's dafka? We actually had a Mishnah not too long ago that had a whole host of halachas, where the where the Torah says behema or shar or chamar, and it was lavdafka. I mean, all sorts of animals. So that's what the Gemara is going to ask right now. The Gemara says, right? Why is it dafka shar oseh? Just because the pasuk said shar oseh, Neilif shar mishabas. We should learn from Gzera Shabbat from Shabbos, Malahalan, just like by Shabbos, which specifically called out certain animals. Still, we said it applies to Chaya va'ov kiyotze behen, Avkan Chaya va'ov kiyotze behen. Just because it says shar oseh doesn't mean it should be limited to shar oseh. It should be any animal. So Amar Rava, Amar Kra, shar v'seh, shnei pa'amim. Sharvasa in Midiachrini Lo. So again, you read the pasuk, and we are going to slice and dice this pasuk right now. So let's all get familiar. Hopefully, it's on your page. The pasuk says, "Ki yignov ish shar oseh utvacho o mecharo chamisha bakri yishalim tachas hashar ba'arbatzon tachas aseh." So it not only says shar oseh in the beginning of the pasuk, it says shar and seh at this in the back half of the pasuk. So therefore, it says it twice. It says it twice to teach me that shar and seh are dafka.
The last part says arba son tachas aseh.
Yeah, because it's chamesh when it's a shar and it's arba when it's a seh.
Son and seh. The end of the pasuk says bakar showing tachas shor, arba son tachas aseh.
I thought son is a goat or a lamb. It's not what it says.
So son is sheep and says
Yeah,
that
that is a lamb. Stone, I think, can even encompass a goat. Isn't am I making that up? The carbon pesach can be a goat for sure, right? Yeah.
Isn't a sheep absent of horns and some do have one?
This is where I'm the backup to the backup. This is where you need the real firepower.
You bet.
Exactly. This is where we need Yoel back for these types of questions. So Amri, but the Gemara says, so you're telling me that because there was a mention of a shar and a seh in the Reisha and a shar and a seh in the Seif of the pasuk, that's why shar and seh is dafka. But the Gemara says, "Hi miata." Which one of the shar and the seh is extra? Ilem a shar v'seh, the Seif of miater. Maybe I'll tell you that the mention of the shar and seh of the Seif of the pasuk is extra. Denichtav Rahmana. What could the pasuk have said? It could have said Kiyignov shar o seh utvacho o umacharo. Chamisha bakar yishalim tachtav, but arbatzon tachtav. You don't have to say tachas shar tachas aseh. Just say tachtav. But the Gemara says, because of Rachmana Achi, hava amina ba'ishlumi tisha l'chal echad ve'echad. If you kind of read that a little bit slower, you can have a hava amina that if I do one or the other, I'm always chayiv 9. Right? Read the pasuk one more time. Not the actual pasuk, but what the Gemara says the pasuk would have said. Kiyigno shar o seh. If I just steal a shar or a seh, utvacho o macharo, chamisha bakar yishalim tachtav, arbatzon tachtav. It would sound like 9. So v'chitema, but aktiv tachtav, but it says tachtav twice. So then maybe, why would I, it sounds like 4 for this and 5 for this. But the Gemara says, no, chad tachtav miyatar ahuma bayale l'drasha achrina. The reality is we actually have another drasha for one of those tachases. Titania yachol ganav shar shavet mana yishalim tachtav negidin. I would have had a havmina. What if I steal a shar that's worth a mana? It's a nice shar. And I can pay back 5. I have to pay back 5 shars because I shefted it. But maybe I'll pay back 5 like really sick, not worth a lot shars. You know what I mean? So Talmud tachtav, that no, I need whatever I stole, I need to repay similar in quality to whatever I stole. I can't just repay really weak, treifa style shars. So if I stole a shar and I shechted it, I owe 5 shars, ke'ein shaganas, sort of thing. That's what I learned from the extra word tachtav, and therefore I don't have an extra word tachtav, and I would have a havamina that if you removed the shar and the seh from the seifa, and you only left me the shar and the seh of the reisha, I would think that if I steal one of them and I shecht it, I owe 9 cattle. Ella shar said the reisha muter. So maybe I'll tell you the shar and the seh of the reisha is extra. The nichtav Rahmana, what could the Torah have said? Kiyignov ish. Doesn't say what I stole, just as kiyignov ish. Utvacho umacharo, and I shechted it or I sold it. Chamisha bakri yishalim tachas hashar, ba'arbatzon tachas aseh. Right? I can just tell me in the seifa what I stole, and that will be magala what I stole in the reisha. So I didn't need to write these words in the reisha. But the Gemara says, because of Rachmana Hachi, if that's what the Torah said, havamina ad deganiv trey v'tavach lehu, you would have a havamina that I have to steal a shar and a seh. Right? But the Gemara says, and shech both of them. But the Gemara says, what are you talking about? Utvacho ksiv. It says I only shechted it, so I only have to shecht one. The Gemara says, okay. Utvacho ksiv l'chad. Ve'ema ad deganav trabayu umaz ben lu. Then maybe I'll think I have to steal both of them and sell both of them. The Gemara gives the same answer. Umacharo ksiv l'chad. Right? Why would you think I would have to steal both? It says umacharo. Ve'ema hava mina ad deganiv trei b'tavach chad umaz ben chad. Maybe I would think I would still have to steal both, and I would shecht one and sell one. The Gemara says, "Oh, macharo ksiv." It says tvacho, "Oh, macharo." So maybe let's just back up. Let's pretend for a second. Let's go back and pretend. Let's read the pasuk again and see what the Gemara is bothered by. The Gemara would have said. So I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 lines, 5 lines from the wide lines. It says the nichna rachmana piyignov ish. If a person steals utvacho umacharo and he shech and he sells chamisha bakar yishalin tachas ashar va'arba son tachas that. It kind of can sound like I had to steal both. Maybe I only shechted one, and that's what the Gemara is about to say. But maybe I stole both.
So now you own 9.
Exactly. So the Gemara says the ema hava mina adeganav trey but tabach chad mezavach omachar ksiv. So the Gemara says the akati hava mina ad de ganav trebayu. I still have to steal both, but v'tabach chad meshayir chad umezabin chad meshayir chad. The bottom line is I would still the hava mina would be that I have to steal both animals. Maybe I don't have to shecht both animals. Maybe I don't have to sell both animals. I only have to shecht one. I only have to sell one. But I have to steal both animals, and that's not true. I only have to steal one. So therefore, I needed the shar v'seh in the Reisha. I need the shar v'seh in the Seifa. But the Gemara says, well, wait 1 second. I don't need shar and seh in the Reisha, and I don't need shar and seh in the Seifa. I just need one in the Reisha and one in the Seifa. So the Gemara says, Ella shar dis Seifa, the seh de Reisha miater. De nichta rachmana. The Torah could have said this. Ki yigno ish shar. I steal a shar, utvacho macharo, and then I shecht it or I sell it. Hamisha bakar yishalim tachtav. I have to repay 5 bakar tachtav, that shar that I just stole. But arbat son tachas haseh, and then mention seh in the seifa, and I'll know the same halacha applies for the seh. Therefore, shar the seifa v'seh the reisha lamali. Why did I need the shar of the seifa the seh of the reisha? Shma mina shar v'seh in midach minila. And that's where I learned that it's dafka a shar. These halachas only apply to a shar and a seh. They don't apply to anything else.